Everybody, welcome you to another show, New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. Our topic today is going to be dark money.
Campaign finance is like the gateway issue to every other issue that you might care about, whether it be education or tax reform or foreign policy. Campaign finance is at the heart of all of the policy decisions that are being made.
You let big money use dark money and this curtain of secrecy to basically buy a legislature or buy a state or eventually, ultimately, control public policy in this country.
Dark money is the topic. What is it? How does it affect public policy, our elections? Is it he who has the most money making the rules? What's exactly going on? We got a panel here to discuss that.
My name is Olivia Zink. I'm the Executive Director of Open Democracy. We're a nonpartisan group in Concord, New Hampshire that is founded by Granny D, who walked across the country for campaign finance reform. And we work on dark money at the state level mostly.
Eric Benevides, National Coordinator for Wolfpack. We are also a nonpartisan organization working on getting money out of politics and ending corruption. We work here in the state of New Hampshire, but we also work nationally with thousands of volunteers. And we're working to get a 28th Amendment to the Constitution to fix this problem.
And Jim Rubens, former state senator, ran for U.S. Senate in 2014, 2016 as a Republican. I'm a conservative. I'm the New England chairman of Take Back Our Republic, a conservative organization seeking to deal with the dark money problem. And I'm on the board of American Promise, which is also seeking to have a 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to allow Congress to deal with this problem.
And to answer your question about what is dark money, this is hidden money. This is money that we do not know in our political process. Mostly you see it through an advertisement on your television or through flyers that you get in your mail, or even sometimes through phone calls or Facebook ads. But it's sort of when you see paid for by some group that you're not a candidate, when candidate advertisements. But we as consumers need to get better at consuming political mail and advertisements and understand what's being, when something is a dark money advertisement and when it is not.
Let me throw out an example of something I really don't like about dark money. Dark money is, again, it's money coming into the political system, whether to lobby or to campaign for someone or against someone, and you don't know the source of the money. So right now, there is very good evidence that Saudi Arabia, I consider them an enemy of the United States, is giving money to organizations, nonprofit organizations in the U.S. In turn, those organizations give money to LLCs, which then give money from multiple sources for or against particular candidates. I believe that Saudi Arabia is in a major way, through dark money, influencing American policy. People who object to things like the war in Yemen, one of the world's greatest humanitarian crises, and we have Congress people whose elections are impacted by this. This is illegal. It's happening anyway because there's no way to trace the money.
Yeah, and on top of that, we don't, like Jim said, we have no idea where this money is coming from. You have people from out of state donating to these PACs, and then that's influencing New Hampshire politics. It's like, what influence should an outside person outside of the state have on our elections? Those representatives are here to represent us, the people of New Hampshire, not some person that's out in California, in New York. No, that's not what they're about. Why would they even want money from a company in New York when they should be representing the people of New Hampshire? So that's the concern that we have.
And 10 years ago, there was a Supreme Court case, Citizens United, that sort of opened the floodgates for this money in our political process. And in that Supreme Court decision, it did say that states and the U.S. Need to pass disclosure laws so we know who's speaking in our political discourse. That was an 8-1 ruling as part of that Supreme Court case, but states have not passed state-based disclosure laws We have worked 8 years in New Hampshire to pass disclosure laws. We got it through the Senate, 24-0. We got it over through the House, and the governor vetoed it. And so we really need to know who's speaking in our political discourse by passing strong disclosure laws. But many of these groups that are funneling dark money don't want their identities to be disclosed.
And a typical way that dark money is used really creates serious objections by friends of mine who are Republicans in the state Senate. 2-3 days before an election, floods of negative campaign commercials or advertising or Facebook advertising will come out charging a particular candidate with horrible things that happen to be false. And we don't know where that money is coming from. So I can tell you from friends of mine who serve Republicans in the New Hampshire State Senate, this is impacting us at a state level. And dark money is allowing falsehoods to be promulgated at a critical time during campaigns. We don't know who's paying for it. We don't know whether the information is true or false often until after the election. It's distorting election outcomes. It's concealed sources of money, spreading falsehoods, and there's no accountability.
Yeah, and there's no way, they give no time for the truth to come out, for the candidate to refute those allegations, to defend themselves, like in a debate or something to that effect. So it just leaves them no time, and you're left with the lasting impression that flyer gave without the candidate being able to speak on that issue.
So it sounds like we got two parts here. We got federal legislation that covers this, and we have state legislation that covers it. It seems what's been going on across the country is we've had no action at the federal level, but yet other organizations such as yours that exist in other states have taken action in those states and made dark money have to be visible. I mean, is that the way to address the question, or is it public financing of elections? What are the options that we have to be able to work with this?
Yeah, we need lots of reform to our democracy. So yes, we need disclosure level at the state level and the federal level. As we saw at the top of the hour, former FEC Commissioner Ann Ravel speak. Ann's going to be in New Hampshire on October 3rd to speak more about how the Federal Elections Commission works nationally. There's been proposals called the Federal Disclose Act that our members of Congress have co-sponsored because they've been pushed by citizens here to co-sponsor these important reforms. But we also need to create an alternative way of funding elections. We have public roads, we have public schools, yet we expect our politicians to go out to millionaires and billionaires and collect money from them to run elections. That should not be the way we should reform our system and have public financing of elections so our elections are owned by voters, not by the billionaires.
James Madison, one of the architects, framers of our Constitution, in describing what was being created by the founders, the framers, and a government accountable solely to the people. So we now have a campaign funding system that makes candidates increasingly, and to a very dangerous extent, accountable solely to billionaires in New York and San Francisco. And it's basically drowned out the voices of the people. So all organizations have different agenda items, but we're unified on the notion that candidates should be accountable to the people that they represent. So how do we change the laws? How do we change the campaign funding system so that candidates not only are accountable during their votes and during the issue process, but during the process of getting elected or staying elected? How do we do that? So one of the things that I think many of our organizations favor is some type of public financing of elections, particularly so that small donors have enough clout, enough power, so that candidates can go out, candidates who wish to do so voluntarily, can go out and raise sufficient sums of money from people who can vote for them. And so you tighten up that bond between candidates and the people they represent, not just during their term in office, but during their elections and during their fundraising operations. So some of us admire the Seattle system, where a voucher is given to all voters in a particular district, and those voters can give those vouchers. They might be $25, $100. They can give those vouchers to any candidate who voluntarily forecloses themselves the option of raising money from large donors. So candidates can voluntarily say, I want to be accountable just to my constituents, and I want to be able to raise sufficient sums of money to run a competitive election from my constituents.
This last election cycle, they did focus on the Seattle initiative, and that basically they wanted to get it into a study committee, not that they were saying that was going to be the final decision. But they didn't even vote for that to get into the study committee. When can that be brought up next? What do citizens have to know about this?
So the New Hampshire Senate, there was a bill introduced last year, Senate Bill 304, that would make New Hampshire the next state to have public financing. Many other states have full publicly financed elections. And this bill was retained by the Senate, re-referred by the Senate. It means that they hold it over the summer. And there'll be more hearings in October, and the full Senate will vote on this proposal in January. And it's exciting that these reforms that have been talked about for a long time are gaining momentum. People know that in order to have a government owned by us, if we want our kids to educate, we want our roads paved, if we want to have foreign policy that works for all of us, we need to look at, if we don't want this country to go into debt, we need to look at who's funding elections. And I think to your point about there's 150 families that give the majority of the money, including dark money, in political process. A very small few that are funding our elections currently, and that's why this reform is so critical.
Yeah, and I believe that, we work on the state level, and that's great, and I totally support that, and we need to be doing that. We need to be giving our candidates an option in our states to be able to go to, so they don't have to go to the dark money, they don't have to go to the big donor money. But I think that we also, at the same time, have to be working on the federal level as well, so that we can take that option off the table of going to the donors, or at least maybe limit that option, or find some system that will work, that will level the playing field for the rest of us, and that it won't be taking the voices away from public citizens. Because here's the thing, is like, we can pass legislation, and again, I support that. I think that's the greatest thing in the world, to have public financing in our state, but laws can be overturned, and it's if a new administration comes into our state, if somebody takes over the state house, if dark money takes over the state house, they can rescind those laws. Whereas if we were to amend the Constitution, that is a lot, it goes above the Supreme Court, it goes above Congress, and it's a more solid solution. And I think that we can do both. I think that we can work on the state level and the federal level. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can get this done on both fronts and solidly shore up our elections.
I should say that American Promise, look it up, American Promise, that I represent, I'm on the board, they're seeking to have Congress author a 28th Amendment, which would be sent back to the states, 3/4 of which are required to ratify an amendment, restoring to Congress the power to set reasonable limits on campaign spending and campaign contributions. This was the state of affairs before Citizens United, roughly 10 years ago. So the people who support this form of the 28th Amendment, there are various approaches to language, but this is a fairly restrained approach. Let Congress, if it wishes, set laws to limit on a reasonable basis, without impacting or without harming the First Amendment rights of people to speak, to set reasonable limits on campaign spending and contributions.
And 82 towns in New Hampshire went at town meeting resolutions, warrant articles passed in 82 towns in New Hampshire. And this year was the first time that the House and the Senate passed a resolution calling on Congress to amend the Constitution to regulate money and speech. And so New Hampshire became the 20th state this year calling for this constitutional amendment. And it's a huge victory for our citizens. And I just want to, give hope to the people who worked hard, collected signatures at the town dump, got something on their town warrant article that passed overwhelmingly, went to the State House, testified time and time again, because New Hampshire just became the 20th state calling for this amendment. And I think that there's so much work that we can do at a local level to educate our friends and neighbors, so that we can begin to change the discourse on money and politics.
I should add that 66% of Republicans, a supermajority of Republicans, back this approach, the 28th Amendment approach. 2/3 of Republicans back this approach. This is something that spans parties. among the public. People want this kind of reform to happen. People now, a poll was done in April asking the American public what they thought of 10 issues, which emerged as a crisis in America. Only one issue of these 10 issues, things like immigration, poverty, healthcare, only one issue reached the point where over half of Americans thought it was a crisis, political corruption. People know there's a problem, and they know that we need to fix this. So all our groups are working on this.
And I mean, Jim says that, over 60% are Republicans, but over 90% of people believe that one of the biggest issues that we're facing today is political corruption, and that it needs to be fixed. And a recent Princeton study it looked back over the last 40 years at legislation that was passed and the correlation between what the public wanted or what the public needed. And there was a zero correlation between what the public wanted and what legislation was being passed, although there was a very strong correlation between what the 1% or the high donor class wanted as opposed to what got passed. So we are not being represented right now. Yeah. And I think the thing that we can put forth to everyone today on this panel is the urgency that needs to happen. We are systematically losing our representative democracy, and we really need to start working towards everything that everybody is proposing at this table in order to get back that democracy.
And together we can fix it. It's really important that we remember that it's we the people have a voice in our system, and we the people together can fix it. Cross party lines, but there are solutions out there that are tried and tested that work, and we need these reforms, and we can together make those reforms possible.
How do we address the counterpoint being that this dark money allows people that would not normally be able to be representative, like businesses being concerned about it being out there in the public, that this process actually gives them a voice that they otherwise would not have?
Short answer, dark money is a license to spread lies. Now, on the other hand, when your name is, we were talking before in the green room about accountability. If you're at a New England town meeting, you raise your hand, you're recognized to speak, you identify your name, and you register your opinion. You're accountable for what you say. And it makes people judicious, it makes them careful, it makes them more factual than otherwise. So dark money is a license to lie, and we see this during campaigns, as I mentioned earlier in the campaign. Days before elections, massive lies at great expense are spread about for or against candidates. And it's not helping the public at all. Candidates hate it.
But we also have we have an opioid crisis in the state, and we're allowing pharmaceuticals to run roughshod over the laws that are created. And the pharmaceutical companies, there's 32 paid lobbyists in Concord. There's a lot more paid lobbyists at the federal level. Do we want a government that's run by the big pharma companies, or do we want a government where we can afford prescription drugs and we don't have an opioid crisis? I would say the majority of us want a government that works for all of us. And we need to make sure that we're not allowing dark money to be hidden by a big pharma group or by another entity who are picking winners and losers in our political process. We need prescription drugs that are affordable. We need to end the opioid crisis, and we need to change the whole system at the base level so that we can find solutions to other problems.
So we're actually talking not just about dark money here, we're also talking about big money. We're talking about very concentrated sums of money that is so large. Let me give an example back from my run for U.S. Senate in 2016. That election, Maggie Hassan won that election by 1,700 votes. I ran in the primary as a Republican. $132 million were spent on the New Hampshire election for U.S. Senate 2016. $132 million. 95% of that money came from out of state. So what we're seeing now is very wealthy people in places like New York or San Francisco are coming in and they're identifying swing races in swing states, whether for U.S. Senate or House or Congress, and they're literally picking candidates by identifying people that they like, sometimes importing them from out of state into the state, providing huge sums of money, so large that it freezes out competing candidates. So these sources of not just dark money, but big money are picking candidates for us, and they're completely distorting the process by which local people find candidates and elect them for the purpose of representing the unique or particular needs of a state. So one of the concerns that the conservatives have is that we are losing the benefits of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. You hear a lot of talk about the First Amendment. The 10th Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, is just as important, that powers not expressly granted to Congress or to the states are reserved to the people. We're federalizing many elections by virtue of people in San Francisco or New York having a particular agenda. They're amalgamating all the states, and so states and the unique needs of the states, these laboratories of democracy by which different approaches to problems are tested and replicated, we're losing the benefits of federalism by virtue of a very small number of people concentrating big money, picking candidates, suppressing local voter intent. This is also bad for the country. It's another reason that many of us, and the three of us sitting at the table here, want this problem fixed.
I mean, and we ask for accountability in almost every aspect of our society. We ask for people to be accountable to their actions, right? For almost anything you're talking about. Yet for this, we allow people to anonymously donate millions of dollars to candidates and have no accountability at all. And I just don't see how, our society who values itself on accountability can just let that stand.
But to Jim's point about the candidates that we're picking, we're actually training candidates to be professional fundraisers, not to actually serve the will of the people. And Maine, our neighboring state, has had a system of public financing for the last 20 years. And there was this one waitress who ran to serve as a House member in Maine. And she said, oh, what I need to do under this public financing system is go out and talk to voters in my district and collect $5 from them. And as a waitress, she felt like, oh, I know how to do that. And she became a very effective legislator as somebody who said, I care about my community and I want to see it benefit. This is the transformation that policies like public funding have on our system. And many people don't realize that we actually used to pick our president through public financing of elections. And up until recently, when they felt like, oh, there's not enough money in those coffers to run elections. But we can go back to a place where Congress and the president is picked through public financing of elections, where we check off and we all give $3 on our taxes to go into the public financing system.
Yeah.
What Olivia is describing is a system where a candidate can raise sufficient sum of money to compete with a dark money funded candidate from small donors in sufficient amount so they can run a viable campaign, but so that no small donor can buy the vote of that candidate. So candidates can be viable, can win elections, raising money from people that they actually represent, but no one can give them enough money to buy their vote. So they're free to exercise in our republic, take back our republic. they're free to act in the general well-being of their constituents, as opposed to a big donor from San Francisco. That's a tremendously refreshing solution that we all seek.
Yeah, and I mean, to go to what Olivia was saying by, basically dialing for dollars, that our candidates are having to do. They're spending, on average, around 70% of their time dialing for dollars, when 70% of that time could be creating legislation for people that they represent. That's what they should be focused on when they're not going across the street into a telemarketing place so that they can dial as many high money and that really drives them to the high money donors, because if you're trying to collect $5 donation, $10 donations, that takes a lot of time to call a lot of people. Whereas if you can call one or two people and get $10 million, we're almost creating a system where going to the high dollar donations is advantageous to them.
And I want to thank the listeners for joining us, but also that you can go to our websites, opendemocracy.nh.org,
wolf-pac.com,
Google American Promise, or Take Back Our Republic, takeback.org.
and continue this conversation, because we need to continue having dialogue about how we can transform our system, and together we really can fix it.
Can you reiterate the next event you're doing for the close here?
Yeah, so on October 3rd, Ann Ravel, who's the former chairwoman of the FEC, is coming to New Hampshire. You can go to opendemocracy.org and purchase tickets. There'll be an event in Peterborough and one in Portsmouth. But I think it's really important that even if you can't make it to join Ann Ravel, that you listen to what she's been saying about how we can transform our federal election system.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for watching our show, and the next show that we're doing is going to be in regards to the financial health of construction workers, minimum wage, and possible $15 minimum wage will be part of the conversation. So I hope you join us next week. Thank you, and have a good one.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education. And it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they by a system that threw them overboard. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly your jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these workers who don't give a damn. They don't about you at all, at all, at all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.